Our keynote speaker today is Dr. Michael Patrick. He is the host of nationwide children's podcast called Pediacast, which offers, quote, the latest news parents can use, answers to listener questions, and interviews with pediatric and parenting experts. Pediacast has been an evidence-based, award-winning educational podcast since 2006, which makes you an elder statesman of sorts in that just from the time that you've been podcasting. With over 300 episodes, 2 million downloads, and listeners in all 50 states and more than 100 countries around the world, more parents trust Pediacast than any other audio source. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mike.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm glad all of you are here today. I want to start by just letting everyone know that I'm a pediatrician and it is cold and flu season. And so I've pretty much had a runny nose this entire winter, which is usual. So I'm going to be drinking and coughing, and I've got some cough drops, and just we'll get that out of the way. So you'll notice on the agenda that under OSU role, there is a blank line for me. But I just want to mention the College of Medicine is part of Ohio State, and I'm an assistant professor. The Department of Pediatrics of the College of Medicine is actually housed at Nationwide Children's Hospital. So we are part of Ohio State as well, and proud to be that. I do not have any relative financial relationships, nothing to disclose. All the images that I'm using in this presentation I'm allowed to use. So kind of a blueprint of what we're going to talk about today. I just first want to recognize that digital storytelling is an important way to engage an audience, and then by engaging them and grabbing their attention, really impacting what they know about and the sort of decisions that they make. We're going to identify the 6 reporter questions and explain how they can be used in several ways to communicate a story. And then talk a little bit about curating and creating digital content with an emphasis on podcasts. But a lot of us, in addition to doing podcasts, you may write blog posts that go along with it. You may have a blog component of the information at your website. I mean, you might make YouTube videos that go along with the podcast or provide supplemental material. So we're going to talk about other types of digital content as well, and then how you can best engage your audience with those. The other disclaimer that I want to make is, as a pediatrician, I've been doing a podcast for consumers now 12, 13 years. I also do a continuing medical education podcast where the target audience is fellow pediatricians, and I've been doing that one since 2015. So most of the examples that I can give you, in order for them to be genuine and make sense, come from the medical world. Are there any other medical podcasters out there? So these will really resonate with you. But for the rest of you, as I tell stories, I really want you to think about your area of interest and what stories that you're trying to engage your audience with. And I am absolutely fine with writing notes, clicking away on keyboards, taking pictures of slides, and then we'll, if you have a burning question, I'll try to answer it as we go along. Otherwise, we'll save questions for the end. But I really want you to think about your topic as we go through sort of the pieces parts of engaging folks with a story. But the examples are all going to be medical, because it'll sound really silly if I try to be an expert in your field. So storytelling, of course, is very important. And when we engage really anything in our lives, and just think about this with your personal web viewing habits, for example, if something doesn't pull you in and really makes you interested to keep reading, to keep listening, to keep watching, we move on to something else. And so it really is important, if you want to get your information out there, if you want to make a difference in people's lives, if you want to just increase their knowledge and enrich them in that way, it's important to tell a good story. And you know, not only do we want to we draw people in, as I mentioned, but then what happens with a good story is we trigger an emotional response. And it may be a mild response. It may be something that's really more of a sincere, you know, it could make you angry. It could make you, feel like you're loved. It could make you feel really lots of different ways. But there's a good story. There's some sort of an emotional response, so that you care about this story and you keep reading, and you start to have empathy maybe for the players. And then once you've really got them at that point where they care about what it is that you're talking about, then you present your call to action. So what is it that I want you to do or think with this new knowledge that you have? So just as an example, a lot, especially in the medical world, a lot of the myths and misconceptions that are spread on the internet, the reason that they're out there and people believe them is because the folks who have those ideas and points of view are good storytellers. And just as one example, the HPV vaccine, which is the human papillomavirus vaccine, it's a virus that causes many sorts of cancers. And there are folks out there who would say that the HPV vaccine causes brain damage of all sorts. And there's no research, evidence-based research to show that that actually is true. There certainly are studies that would show associations, but you can show an association with anything when you give an entire population something and then follow them over time. I mean, if kids are getting HPV vaccines every single day, bad things happen to kids, and so there always are going to be associations in time. But if you look at groups who have the HPV vaccine and groups who don't, there's no difference in the incidence of any of these things. However, someone will say, it causes brain damage. Here's what happened to my child, that they were a normal, functioning teenager, they got this vaccine, and then they had brain issues, mental health issues, neurological issues afterward. And so you feel really bad that happened to their kid. And there is studies to show that once you hear something more than 6 times, you do start to believe that maybe that's true. So the call to action for these folks would be just to skip this vaccine. This is one you probably shouldn't get your kids. And it's an effective message. And a lot of families don't get that vaccine. Flu shots, sort of the same thing. The hook is that I get sick every year when I get my flu shot. I get my flu shot and I feel miserable. It somehow hurt my immunity, and so I was actually sicker the year that I got a flu shot because it hurt me in that way. Here's what happened to me. Take my advice. Don't get a flu shot because it's not going to be all that helpful. Gluten-free diets. Even if you think gluten-free diets if you think gluten causes brain fog or causes ADHD, there are folks who put that message out there that gluten does this, and if you go gluten-free, you'll fix these things. There's no evidence-based research to show that that's true. If you have celiac disease, you should certainly avoid gluten, but not for behavioral kind of stuff. But folks will tell you, here's our story, this is how our family was cruising along, we went gluten-free, and life was great after that. So you too should go gluten-free. And it's a powerful message that a lot of people, it's gluten causes inflammation of all sorts, and so if you want anti-inflammatory, don't eat gluten. But there's no evidence-based research to suggest that's true. And then fluoride, this is a big one in rural communities where there is not fluoride in the water, and when levies come up to put it in there, the groups come out and they say fluoride causes cancer, does all these other things, look what happened to these people, so vote no on adding fluoride to the city water. And they're very passionate about this and present that call to action after triggering an emotional response. Now, especially if you're an expert in this area, and again, think about your own topics and interests and what are sort of the misconceptions and myths that are out there. It's really easy to take that message that they've given and really become adversarial and say, well, just kind of like I was, as I was telling you, there's no evidence base for this. So it's easy to take an adversarial tone, sort of lack empathy for the motivation of the storyteller. I mean, we should have some empathy because folks who truly believe that a vaccine injured their child, of course they're going to have a passionate story about that. And so at the end of the day, they have kids' best interest in mind, and they're telling their passionate story because they do want to present a call to action. They do want to motivate parents to act in a certain way because they truly believe that this is going to hurt their child. And so if we come at it with an adversarial tone and we lack empathy to the outside world who's kind of watching an exchange, you really seem like you don't care. We tend to place emphasis on bland data. We'll say, hey, there's no evidence to suggest that this is true. We kind of dumb down the topic a little bit. And that altogether sort of comes across as just being condescending. And maybe you did or didn't think that I was acting that way as I was telling those previous stories and responding to them. So then how do you go about telling your story if you feel that there's myths and misconceptions in your particular area? How do you get those messages across? Well, a better way to do it is to voice empathy for the storyteller. You know, that I'm sorry that happened to your child. I'm sorry you feel this way. And even if you don't voice the empathy, I think if you just have it and search for it, your response is going to have a little bit of a different tone. Explain the topic in terms that your audience can understand. So you want to use, and we're going to talk about target audiences as we move along. But it is important to identify exactly who it is you're talking to so that you use the right language. And of course, then use these elements of storytelling. So you've heard one side, but consider this. And then we want to do the same thing that makes a good story. We want to draw people in. We want to make it matter to them, hopefully evoke a little bit of an emotional response, and then present our call to action. And in the course of podcasting, if you have a particular topic, this is sort of a nice formula to use as you're coming up with your script, to really draw people in with a hook, make it matter, and then present your call to action. So let's say that we want to respond to these myths and misconceptions in medicine. How could we tell a better story? One way, focus on the cancers that HPV causes. I mean, there's lots of different, originally it was cervical cancer, but now we know that there are other cancers that this virus is involved with. And so the HPV vaccine is a safe vaccine. Lots of kids get it every day with no problems at all, and it can prevent many forms of cancer. So get your HPV vaccine. So really kind of spin it to, instead of arguing, let's put the good message out there, and then we'll let people decide who's got the better message. And hopefully, at the end of the day, it's ours. Flu shot, it's that time of the year. Last year, 185 children died from the flu. Nearly all of them were unvaccinated. They did not have flu vaccines. It is protective, and then you can explain, well, of course you feel sick after a flu shot because your immune system is responding to an antigen. It is revving up, and that makes you feel a little achy. It might give you a low-grade fever. You also got your flu shot in a doctor's office where there's sick people in the waiting room, so a few days later, of course, you're going to be sick. So, explain the science. Explain that all those illnesses that you got during the course of the winter, none of them were the flu. They were regular colds, and there's hundreds of different strains of viruses, so you can get lots of them. Or even if you did get the flu after the flu shot, folks who have the flu shot have a shorter course of illness, less severe, less risk of complications like pneumonia, less hospitalization. So it's still a worthwhile vaccine, even if you do get the flu. So explaining those positive messages rather than just saying, oh, you're crazy. Gluten-free diet. Okay, so gluten does not cause brain fog and ADHD, but lack of sleep does. And so maybe focus on that rather than arguing. Sleep will help these things. And it's important to help those because brain fog and ADHD do affect your quality of life. So our message is going to be get more sleep. And then fluoride, I had a little more trouble with this one. Explaining what life was like before we regularly used fluoride. I just saw the World War I movie, They Shall Not Grow Old, I think was the name of it. So there was actual footage from World War I. This was really before universal fluoridation. And one thing that struck me was the teeth of these soldiers. They were young adults whose teeth almost universally looked just terrible. And so just realizing tooth decay is a bad thing. It really does lead to bad quality of life. And there's an easy way to prevent it. It's safe. So please vote yes to the levy. So hopefully we'll motivate some people to add fluoride to their water. Now the good news is that most of the topics that we talk about are not necessarily controversial, and this still works very well even when it's not. So you may not be trying to change someone's point of view as I am in medicine, where there's a lot of points of view that are not based in evidence. You just may have an interesting topic that you want to get out. You want to enrich folks' lives. Maybe you do want to change some of the decisions that they make related to health and wellness. But not everything is controversial or that we're taking an opposite view. And this sort of thing still works really for all of these topics. So asthma, for example, we want to do a lot of good asthma education to help improve the quality of life for kids and their families. So our hook is, asthma can be deadly. Asthma kills kids every year, and they are preventable deaths. And why it matters, there's two kinds of medicines you use for asthma: a controller medicine and then a rescue medicine. And if you get those confused, you're going to have trouble because the blue inhaler, which is the one that you should use every day, takes a few days, maybe even a week or two, to really be at its full effect. And if you're acutely wheezing, it's not going to do anything for you. So you don't want to mix those up. And how can you avoid mixing them up is to use an asthma action plan. So by telling that story maybe of a child who did get them mixed up, the parents did, he ended up in the hospital. He did not have a horribly bad outcome, but he wouldn't have had to be in the hospital had the parents used an asthma action plan. So again, a hook, try to make it matter in some way, and then present that call to action. Well, of course, there's a lot more to the story. I mean, if you want to do a podcast topic for, let's say, 20 minutes on asthma, I need more stuff than that to make it an interesting story. So the hook, make it matter, call to action is kind of the underlying structure, but we want to hang lots of good information on that. And the more information, different kinds of information that you can present, the more you're going to make your podcast segment matter to the most people, because individuals in your audience are going to have different questions, and the more of those that you can answer about a topic, the more that you're going to be relevant to your entire audience. So that's where, at least the first place where the reporter questions come in. And I don't know if you remember these from like a high school English class, like from journalism class, just the classic who, what, when, where, why, and how. And if you answer all of those to some degree and in some way, you're going to have a more complete story and get that information out there for folks. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but this is just a brainstorming activity where you think about your topic and try to think what questions match those. So, who is affected by asthma? Who treats asthma? What is it? What causes it? When are steroids used? And you can just go through and come up with all sorts of who, what, when, where, why questions that relate to your particular topic. Where should they go for help? Why do steroids work? Why do we recommend using a spacer with an inhaler, even in adults? How do the different kinds of medicines work? And the point here is we don't have to answer every single one of these questions that we come up with as we're putting a story together. But the point is just to brainstorm. And often when I do this, and I do this when I write blog posts too, there'll be an aspect of a particular topic that I wouldn't have thought of had I not done that exercise of going through the who, what, when, where, why, how questions. Now, whatever topic that you typically work with, there's probably some general framework that goes along with that topic that also answers these who, what, when, where, why, how questions. And so I tried to think like, okay, outside of medicine, what could I use? Movie reviews. If you do a podcast on movie reviews, you can go through those questions. I mean, for every movie that you're going to review, you probably want to know who are the actors that are in that particular movie. What's the movie about? What genre is it? When was it filmed? Where's the setting? So you probably have some structure of things that sort of match those questions. In medicine, I always think in terms of, okay, what's the medicine, or what's the illness? What's the condition that we're talking about? What's kind of a brief definition of that? Then who gets that illness? And do we see it in particular groups more than others? What's the pathophysiology? How's that illness affecting our body? What are the symptoms? What other things cause those symptoms? And then how do you differentiate? What's the workup look like? How do you treat it? What are the complications of the treatment? What are the complications of the disease? So you can do risk-benefit on how you're going to treat it. Then what are the complications? How do you prevent it? What's the prognosis? So I think that's one thing that makes Pediacast sort of nice, is that when I take any kind of topic, any disease or illness, I do try to hit on all of these, and then a parent gets a more complete idea of this particular disorder, and I think that's helpful for them. So think whatever topic it is that you talk about in your podcast, is there a framework that generally fits with all of your topics that do match up with who, what, when, where, why, how, which will help you develop a more complete story for your particular audience. Now, that's kind of the obvious use of the reporter questions. I think what we're going to talk about now is really a more important use of them, and that is being intentional about planning how you're going to tell your story and get this information across. Rather than just giving a bunch of facts that answer who, what, when, where, why, how, let's be a little bit more intentional about how we put this story together. And in order to do this, we have to rearrange the reporter questions. Maybe you learned them in this order, I don't know. They just kind of roll off my tongue, who, what, when, where, why, how. But we're actually going to start with what. That's the most, that's the place you got to start, because you want to know what it is that you're going to talk about. What is it exactly that you want people to know? What is your topic going to be? And this is actually more difficult than you might think. When you start a podcast, you are passionate about your topic, and you probably have 10 episodes that are easy to put together. This is what I'm passionate about, what I want to talk about. But you get to I'm on episode 426 that I'm writing the script for Pediacast. That's what I was working on yesterday. And at some point, you run out of topics. And so you really have to have some go-to places. And I would suggest that you, if you're in the beginning stages of putting a podcast together, just think about what your resources could be. Where are you going to get your ideas? And make a list. And often it's places that you may not think of. So, we start with what are our interests and passions, what's inside our mind. What are people asking you about? If you're an expert in a particular field, you probably have friends and family who ask you questions, and you're like, oh, of course, you know what the answer is. It's not something I think about. That's what, people who don't know a lot about this are thinking about. So think about what questions others are asking and address those. What's happening in your social media feeds? What are people talking about? What's in the mainstream news? Sometimes they're getting it right, sometimes they're getting it wrong, and you may have thoughts on how to address those things. In science and in other academic areas, journals, peer-reviewed journals, what's going on there. Smart Brief has anyone heard of Smart Brief? No one? Oh, you're going to love this. So Smart Brief is a company that, and this is absolutely free for the consumer end, they put together a daily digest of important news stories in a particular field. So, and some of them are sciences, but not all of them. And so you sign up for this, and then you get an email every weekday, with a load of stories related to your field. And so, of course, I subscribe to the pediatrics one, and a lot of those stories end up on my Twitter feed, out on Facebook, and really engaging an audience on social media is a fantastic way to recruit people in then to listen to your podcast. So I think social media use is really important in podcasting, and just being able to provide information, even if it's not something you're going to cover on your podcast, but it's still of interest to your target audience, is always great. Eureka Alert. Anybody have heard of a Eureka Alert? So Eureka Alert, every time an article gets published in an academic journal, if it's of note, and most institutions like to think all of their articles are of note, the marketing and PR department will write a press release about that particular article, which puts a little bit of a spin on what it is you should get out of this. And this press release is written for the press. This is how mainstream news finds out about journal articles, through these press releases. And Eureka Alert catalogs all of the press releases. So you can search for any topic and find what's being printed in academic journals and see what the institutions want you to think about that particular thing. So that's a great place to get ideas. And then there's just repositories for medical news that's out there. Medical News Today is one, healthday.com. But really anything you're interested in, there's going to be other people who have that interest, who curates content, puts it together, and just start searching and finding where those places live, so you can get that information. So after you do pick a topic, this is what I want people to know. The next question really has to be, why do you want them to know it? And if you can't come up with a good reason of why, then maybe you need to pick a different topic. So why is this an important thing to discuss? And then who do we want to tell? This then comes to our target audience. And this is going to be important for lots of reasons. And I like to sort of brainstorm this. I start kind of big. This is a bit easier if you're podcasting, because you probably have a fairly defined target audience. For me, in Pediacast, we have a lot of parents who listen, but I also have medical learners, medical students, residents who listen to that podcast. And about 20% of the Pediacast audience are practicing pediatricians, even though I have a podcast for them, the continuing medical education one, but they like to listen to Pediacast as well. So, start big in big chunks. As I'm thinking about this and framing it, am I talking to parents, to learners, to my colleagues, who exactly is is it? And then zero in on a particular target audience. And the smaller you can get the slice of who you have in mind, the more relevant you're going to be for that group of people. And this is important because the words that we choose, the tone that we choose, the way that we explain it really changes depending on exactly who our target audience is. And then the how is, how am I going to how am I going to present my topic in a way that's going to grab the interest of my target audience and make it matter? So this all still boils down to, how am I going to hook them in, and how am I going to make it matter, and what is my call to action going to be? How am I exactly going to do that? And the way that you answer this is by trying to figure out what it is that your target audience needs. So if you know what their needs are, you're going to be able to hook them in and make it matter, and then present a call to action that they can actually accomplish. But you have to think about what their needs are first. And so what ultimately, where the sweet spot is you have your goals, which is the why, and you have their needs, and how do you match up your goals while meeting their needs? And if you can accomplish that, you're going to have a segment of your podcast or blog post or whatever digital content that you're trying to create. It's going to be more successful if you're able to do this. So this is all great in terms of theory, but how does it actually work? And so I wanted to just sort of walk through an example of how, what does this look like in the real world? It's going to be a medical one, but I think it's one that we can all relate to. So as I started, I thought about my, this idea did not come to the top of my head on its own. I actually found it in Medical News Today. There was a story about it. I went to the press release at Eureka Alert. I read what the institution thought about this particular story, and then I went to PubMed and I found the original article and read through the article before I decided that I was going to talk about this on the podcast. So this is a journal article from Scientific Reports in December 2017 from the University of Pennsylvania, and it just looks at the effect of weekly fish consumption. So I eat fish at least once a week. What does that do to my IQ? And what does that do to my sleep quality, which is something that we know also increases your IQ. So if you eat fish once a week, are you smarter? And this study said that weekly fish consumption in school-aged children, and it was actually a pretty well-designed study. It took lots of factors into account, including socioeconomic status and health conditions, and it was actually really well done. And it showed that there was a statistically significant association in improved sleep, which we know improves IQ with weekly fish consumption, and that IQ was better, and then school performance was better as well. And so the authors, their call to action in the paper was we should all be eating more fish. And of course we should. There's lots of health benefits of eating fish, other than just mental health. So what is it exactly then that we want people to know? Well, we want them to know that if you eat fish daily, you can improve your sleep, you can improve your IQ, you can improve school performance. And of course we want them to know to improve health literacy. We want improved health outcomes. We want kids to do better in school, and we want them to be successful, make a good living, have happiness, and maybe that starts with eating more fish. I don't know. So it seems like a good message, and one that there's a good why to why I would want to share this. So who are we going to tell? Lots of big categories that I could choose, and it is important to narrow this down, as you'll see, because then how we're going to present this would be very different if we had picked a different target audience. But so it could be patients that I want to tell, especially, the study was done in younger kids, but maybe it'd be good for teenagers too. Families, primary care doctors, dietitians, school officials. Maybe school lunches ought to have fish once a week. So if kids aren't getting, I could make an argument that, hey, if they're not getting it at home, maybe we can help kids do better in school by offering them a fish meal once a week. And of course, medical learners are another one. So for my example, I picked toddlers, or I'm sorry, parents. Yeah, the toddlers probably are not listening to my podcast. But I picked the parents of the toddlers, and my thought process was this: if you can get a toddler to start eating fish once a week, then maybe they'll grow up to be the kid, the child, the teenager, the adult who eats fish once a week. So if you can get them to like it early, maybe those are the parents that we ought to zero in on. So I picked parents of toddlers as my target audience. So what is it that our target audience needs? That's the next question. So what do you think? What do you think a target audience of parents who have toddlers at home, what would they need if I wanted them to increase fish consumption in their kids? Any ideas? Yeah. Yes, so taste, absolutely. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes some fish you hear about toxins in the fish, so like what fish is safe to eat, or is there a point at which too much fish is going to be too much mercury or something? So good. And anything else? Oh, how to prepare it? Yeah, absolutely. In a way that's going to be appetizing. Good. So I thought of those things as well. The other one that I came up with was what was the other one? Well, let's look. So what we want to do is really come up with practical ideas, right? And so that's what all of these kind of go back to. I mean, you're really describing barriers to fish consumption. Oh, the other one that I came up with was cost. So fish costs more than other meats, and so that could become an issue too. But all of these are barriers. So what our audience needs is to figure out how to get over the barriers of doing what my call to action is. And that's not always going to be what your audience need is. I mean, your audience need might very well be, is this a movie I had to spend my time and money on, or is it not? And I mean, that's really, they just need to know what it is about this movie that might make them want to go or not want to go. So it's not always about barriers, but in this case, I think that did fit pretty nicely, what barriers are there. And taste, cost, and toxins, I kind of came up with those three. So then, how can parents overcome those barriers? Well, we need some kid-friendly recipes. How can we get kids to like the taste of fish? Maybe there are recipes out there that can improve it. What are some budget-friendly options? And then what are safe choices? And so right now you're getting beyond just, I'm telling you that eat more fish so that your kids do better in school. I mean, I'm helping you figure out how to accomplish that. And that's going to be way more beneficial to your listener if you explain those things. So this is where it all comes together, where we want to weave our goals and our needs, and kind of storyboard this a little bit. So what is an outline of whatever I'm going to create, whether it's a blog post, whether it's a podcast segment, a podcast interview, and I'm making a list of questions. An infographic, maybe I'm making a video, whatever it is, I'm just going to kind of outline what I want to do here. And first I want to introduce the topic that eating fish weekly is associated with better sleep and a smarter kid. But you're going to have some problems in achieving this. Those problems are your kid might not like how it tastes, it might not match up with your budget, and there are some toxin concerns with fish. I'm going to help you navigate through that. And then I'm going to conclude with saying, sleep also increases IQ. And so here's just a few ideas on good sleep hygiene tips, just, to be more complete and in a little bit of a conclusion and wrap it up. So I have a nice structure now of a story that I want to present. And I can go back to my hook and why it matters and my call to action. I've accomplished all of this. The hook is, what parent does not want their child to sleep better and to do better in school? This is an important thing for parents. Sleep and IQ are linked to school performance, which is linked to health, wealth, and success later in life. So this is an important thing that we can get excited about. And our call to action is eat more fish. So kind of to complete, as we're planning stories, completing out the reporter questions, when for this particular story now is fine. In the world of pediatrics, talking about the flu in the middle of summer is probably not the right timing, or talking about playground safety in the middle of winter doesn't really match up. So there are topics that you want to think of as you're planning, when is the best time to do this. Also, don't forget your material is evergreen, right? So it's out there, all your past stuff. And in your social media channels, when it's the right time again, promote it. So maybe you did something on a summer topic, the next summer promote it again, reuse that. So as you think about think about past topics that you did as well. And then where are you going to tell this story? You're going to actually do this in multiple ways, even if you're doing it in the form of a podcast. I mean, first, you have to research all of those questions that we're bringing up. So if in the course of a segment or an interview, you need to research for yourself what are good recipes, and how do you get kids to eat the fish, and how do you overcome the price. So you're going to be doing research, and then that research at least some of it ought to make its way into your show notes. So say, hey, for more information on this, we're going to have some links in the show notes so you can go and explore on your own. So that research serves to get some good resources into the hands of parents, which all started with trying to tackle how you're going to meet their needs. And then just sharing those things in social media can be very powerful. And then, of course, creating content, whether it's blogs, podcasts, videos, or whatever else that you're going to create. So let's take this a step further then. This is the material that I was able to come across and I actually did this as a podcast segment. The medical news story, this is what first caught my attention to this particular study. Medical News Today, eating fish weekly improves kids' sleep and intelligence. Then I went to Eureka Alert. I found the press release that University of Pennsylvania put out. Those are things that I can get more information from as I'm writing my script and my story, or I can share those things in social media. This is the actual Scientific Reports article. Always a good idea if you want to be knowledgeable about something and speak on it, to go to the original source. I think reading the news story and the press release kind of primes the pump, and now you're able to read the article and see for yourself, is this really what the science said, or did this get spun in the media or with the press release? I mean, is this really good, strong evidence? And try to, as an expert in your field, sort of make that evaluation. Do I like this, not like it? Which, the news story may seem great, the press release may seem fantastic, but you're doing your audience a disservice if once you read the report, the evidence wasn't that strong, or you're coming up with a different conclusion and here's why. I mean, that could change the whole story. If I actually read through this and was like, no, this is not right, it was, some other thing, I mean, that changes what I want to present to parents. So I think it is important to go to the original. But let's say we go to the original and it all matches up and we're very happy with it. Then you can find some really well done mainstream news reporting. Read it, see if it matches up with what you're trying to say. But in this case, the Telegraph from the UK had a story on it. Newsweek covered it. Even Psych Central. So this one put a psychology twist on it, that eating fish once a week tied to better sleep, higher IQ in kids, and improved mental health. The psychologists agree with this too. So again, just a little bit of a different spin on it that may be worthwhile as you get the content to write your story or share this in the show notes or on social media. Martha Stewart has kid-friendly fish and shellfish recipes that you could share and get some information from that. The 10 best kid-friendly fish recipes. Once you start doing your Google search, you can find all sorts of fantastic resources to build content and to share with your audience. Pinterest, great place to get recipes. So I just did a Pinterest search for fish recipes and kids. You could actually put a link to that search result and say, hey, I found all of these great ones, maybe talk about a couple of them. Buying healthy fish on a budget. We can help parents overcome that with some ideas in that story. Homemade fish sticks are cheaper than ones that you buy, and has ideas on how to exactly do that. Feed your family healthy on a low income budget from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And I love this one. Okay, so you got a lake in your backyard. How do you catch, clean, and cook a fish? A how-to. I mean, that may be something, a little bit of a different spin on this that you could include. That would be interesting for folks. But then which ones are safe? The CDC is, if you're doing anything health and wellness related, they have a fantastic, NIH and CDC, FDA all have tons of great information. So this talks about, tell me a fish story, can I eat what I catch? So that kind of goes along nicely. Here's how you catch it and cook it and yourself. And then is that safe to do? Those are kind of nice complementary resources that you could provide. And then, especially in the world of pediatrics and parenting, a lot of things are mother focused. So I also try to find something that, here in men's fitness, we talk about cheap poison-free fish. Again, a little bit of a different lens on the topic. I might get something a bit different out of it. And then the American Academy of Pediatrics, their healthychildren.org website has tons of great information. So protecting your children from contaminated fish. So again, lots of resources on this particular topic. And the more that you get, the more of a broad, in-depth story you're going to be able to create. So I've curated my content, maybe shared it, figured out what I'm going to have in the show notes. Now I want to put something together. And I am a structure guy. And so I always think, okay, even if I start to write a blog post, it's kind of like high school essay writing. You've got your thesis, you've got your 3 points that you're making, and then a conclusion. And a 500-word blog post is about the sweet spot for how long a blog post ought to be. And there's no definite rules, but they get too long and dense, people are going to lose interest and not read through the whole thing. So, my introduction, 100 words, each of those ways to help parents overcome them, and then my conclusion makes a nice 500-word blog post, give or take. I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be exactly. You may talk about one thing longer and a little shorter somewhere else. Podcast segment, if you want to do a 20-minute podcast segment, which seems like, people can listen during a commute pretty easily. Want to draw them in. I want to talk about these things. As I'm writing my script, thinking about 3 minutes on each of those will give me a nice 20-minute segment. I have found that for interviews, this is a quick pro tip, about 3 minutes per question is what it averages out to. So if I'm planning okay, I want a 20-minute segment, I'm going to need 7 questions to fill 20 minutes. Some people will answer a question in 30 seconds. Sometimes they'll talk for 5 minutes on one question. But in the end, it almost always works out that about 3 minutes per question is what my goal is. And that has always worked for a long time. So as you think about podcast interview, this is a little different, but we're still going to cover all this. So let's say I have an expert. You could have a nutrition expert on your podcast, for example. And just talk, why is this important? What barriers keep kids from eating fish? How can parents find kid-friendly recipes? How can they serve it on a budget? How can they do it safely? And then you can just chat back and forth. What are your favorite fish recipes? And make it real personable. And, oh yeah, I've tried that one or not this one. And maybe put links to your and the guest's favorite fish recipes. You could do the same thing with a YouTube video, a little shorter, more graphics involved. I'm not a video guy, but some of you may be and have some ideas for that. 5-minute video seems about right to me. And again, you can accomplish that with about a minute on each of those. And of course, infographics and professional education modules. So for me, making continuing medical education podcasts that are accredited, I mean, right there you're meeting the need of your audience. So if the audience are your colleagues, providing education hours that they need anyway, and figuring out how to make those, get someone to accredit those, okay, you're really meeting an audience need with that. But it does become much more complex. For example, for my podcast, my continuing medical education podcast, we had to get the legal team, the PR team, the IS team, information services, and marketing. I mean, all had to come to the table to get that, and that took years, honestly, to get everybody to agree. But in 2015, I was told it won't work because you won't have enough listeners. That was wrong. 260,000 unique listens for a continuing medical education podcast with pediatricians listening in all 50 states, over 100 countries. So this stuff, I mean, making this content and making it well and in a way that meets people's needs really works. So now it's your turn. I hope that I've given you some tools to think about this in a little bit of a different way, but in your field. Pick your topic and try to see if you can make this framework, adjust it to make it work for you. And this is one, if you wanted to take one picture, you don't have to, but if you want to take one picture that really sums up this entire talk with, what do you want people to know? What are your goals? Why do you want them to know it? Who is your target audience? How are you telling them where you're going to meet your goals and meet their needs at the same time? And then the when and where are you going to tell the story? So we'll hold off there. And then I do have one shameless plug. that I did not get permission to do, but I think you'll be fine with it. We have a whole day conference in June at Nationwide Children's called Communicating Medicine, Harnessing the Power of Social Media in Healthcare. And as I think about the topics that we're covering, even though we're a healthcare institution, I think anyone interested in reaching people through social media would benefit from this conference. I mean, we're going to really talk about how you engage folks, how you deal with maybe negativity on your social media feeds. We call them trolls in the, I guess you'd call them that anywhere, but we have a lot of them in the medical, in the medical field. And then the afternoon are workshops, and we have a workshop on blog writing, a workshop on interviewing and interview skills, both from the point of being an interviewer and being an interviewee, and then a workshop on just social media engagement and how do you curate an audience. So that'll be June 14th. I have the link there if you wanted to take a picture. That'll get you to the registration page. And it's, I think it's like $40 for a one-day conference, but if you're affiliated with Ohio State, I think there's like an academic discount or teacher discount or something. So, and there's lunch and snacks and all that. So I would encourage you. I think it's going to be a really good conference. We're excited about it. Again, it's a Friday in June that we have that going together. And then I think, oh yeah, we're doing good on time.
So we've got a, we have 1, 2, 3. This
oh, nice.
New thing that we can get your questions in. So does anybody have questions?
Okay, I'm sorry, say it again. Oh, it's about fish. I don't know. I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction there. So nutrients are always better from food than in a pill. How's that? It's better. Now, does that mean that you're not getting anything from it? I think it's less, but how much is it costing? And then you've got to kind of run in your mind, is it really worth the cost? For me, it would not be. But if they won't eat it at all, a vitamin's probably not going to hurt anything. You might make expensive urine, but that's about it. Okay. Sorry. Yes.
How do you handle guests in terms of, getting their permission? Do you have a release form that you give to guests?
Yes, our hospital's legal department was very interested in this, and so they have legalese that basically the guest is signing that, number one, their comments are their own. The hospital is not responsible for what they say, but the hospital owns what they say and can do what they want with it, whether it's put it out as a podcast or you're giving the hospital permission to release it as a podcast, and that you're understanding that once it's out there, it's difficult to come back and you are responsible, not the hospital. And that's all in one nice little page. And actually, I think our legal team used a law firm this is a while ago, in Washington, D.C., who deals with media, and so they have boilerplates. And but if you find if you Google podcast interview guest release, you're probably going to find something. And I was told, in terms of copyright, that lawyers use each other's stuff all the time. So again, don't say Dr. Mike told you this, but I don't think lawyers will sue you for using a release. There you go.
As a teacher, I can first develop a trust with my students over the content, and second of all, my content's not particularly threatening. But as a parent, I know it is threatening. I mean, anything you have to say, anything you read on the internet, you have to take nervously to issues like ADHD or the HPIV. Those were long, complicated discussions. And my question from podcasting is, how do you establish this trust that when you do something in an area that's really controversial, like how do you treat ADHD, how do you establish a trust to parents to believe you, as opposed to the fact we're inundated with materials from the
Yeah,
industry.
yeah. So I think this is a great question. And I think that podcasting lends itself to relationship, even though you never see these people. Like when I listen to a podcast, I feel like I'm sitting in the studio with these people, and you listen to, a handful of episodes, and they start to become like your friends. And you feel like you know them. And so I think that there is some relationship that develops over the course of several episodes. The other thing is by being trustworthy in the non-controversial topics. So when I talk about asthma, and I don't just say, here's what you should do, but I explain it in terms that they can understand, that's not necessarily dumbing down the science. I still explain about inflammation in the airways, and the inflammation is there because your immune system is responding to a particular antigen, a particular thing in the air that you're breathing in. And then you have swelling, and so steroids reduce swelling. The rescue medicine is actually a bronchodilator, so you are relaxing smooth muscle to make the airway bigger. So even though there's inflammation there, air can still get through. So my point is just explaining it in terms they can understand. And then when I explain something more controversial, they're like, well, we trusted him on asthma. We're more likely to trust him on this other thing. They don't always. I have plenty of people who accuse me of having, of damaging kids by promoting vaccines, but everything I do and think about, there is evidence behind it. I do not get a check from Big Pharma at all, so which is another accusation that we get, that we're paid off by the pharmaceutical companies. Not true. At least I don't know. Mine got lost in the mail.
Well, I want to thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah.
Dr.